As a BLANC CANVAS Podcast, my good friend Akin is here with me.
Yes.
You know, it's been a minute, man, since we did our last episode.
Yeah, man, we're just excited about this particular episode, man. It's the first time we're actually doing video.
Yeah, it's a lot of troubleshooting.
Yeah, man. Still working out the kinks, so bear with us.
Yeah, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to wish happy birthday to the United States of America, the greatest country in the world, in my humble opinion. You know, we have a lot of issues. We have a lot of race issues, gender issues, and other issues, especially in politics.
Yeah.
But let's not take for granted that this is one of the greatest story ever told in the history of humanity. This is probably the only place where, as a black man, you have, you know, numerous opportunities at your feet. You know, a lot of countries in the world are not so welcoming to people of our skin color. But United States, you know, you can dream it, you can be it. So what do you think about that, man?
I mean, to an extent, you know, of course, I agree with you because, you know, in America we have so many comforts that, you know, make us, I guess, feel privileged when we compare ourselves to other countries in the world. On one hand, you know, then you still have the racism that's, you know, systemic and institutionalized, you know, to a degree, which is still problems, you know, are problematic in America. So you have, you know, it's like a double-edged sword. You know, you have, right. You guess you have to take the bad with the good, you know, to an extent. But, you know, in regards to, you know, the 4th of July, you know, which was in 1776, you know, enslaved Africans were still being, you know, it was still in chattel slavery until nearly 100 years later, in 1865. So when you talk about the 4th of July being independence for America, it doesn't rightfully apply to black people in America because of the fact that they were not given the same independence as the rest of the country, you know, during that time and up until about 100 years after America's independence. So, you know, there's some conversations that need to be had surrounding that.
Yeah. Speaking of that, do you think, you know, I don't want this to sound negative. Do you think black people as a race, do you think we've not gotten over the psychological injury that the slave trade or slavery itself perpetrated on us? Do you think is a victimhood that we're still holding on to? And if so, like, what is that really doing for us? Because I'm of the belief of, all right, you know, slavery happened. I'm not just saying get over it, because obviously you can still tell in a lot of black communities, especially in the South communities, where if you go back to the history of that particular community, most of them were like maybe slave quarters, and even till this day they're still kind of feeling that effect. But that saying, and moving forward, do you think we should be reminiscing on our past victimhood? And what is that doing for us?
I would say yes, because of a few reasons. If that wrong was righted a long time ago, I believe that the forgiveness would come easier. The memories would be a little bit cushioned if there was some kind of you know, some kind of redemption from that time. But I think that, you know, the fact that you still have you know, the reminiscent evidence of slavery and racism from that time still trickles into our present. It makes it harder to say that we should forget about it or we should move on from it. It's hard to do that when you still have the systemized oppression that's still is still a major factor in black societies. Just recently, Wells Fargo got in trouble because they were still redlining people of color from receiving the same opportunities that they were giving to white Americans. They were charging higher interest on loans and denying loans to to black Americans, and doing all those things that have been done since time immemorial, since America was founded. So it's hard to say we should get over it when it's still affecting us to this day. That's one part of the argument. The other part of the argument is, why is it that black Americans are asked to forget about their past, stop dwelling on the past, move forward, when you have the Jews who their popular saying is what? Never forget.
Never forget, or screaming anti-Semitism.
Right.
Yeah.
Why is it okay for them to say never forget, but then tell us that we should forget?
I think the argument that me as a black man, the argument that I want to make is we should not forget, because obviously, like you rightly said, these things over the course of the century still have a trickle-down effect on us.
Right.
But are we being constantly reminded of our victimhood? And if that is so, how do we move forward from that? How do we build strength? How do we build up our communities? And the reason why I always say that is this: if you compare the what happened to the Jewish people, the Jews, especially in the 30s and 40s under Hitler, and even if you look back in the Bible and in historical documentations, there's been numerous assaults on the people of the Jewish race. I mean, there was one emperor, Titus, that purposely wanted to wipe out the entire race of the Jews, and even before that, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, wanted to wipe them out, but they always managed to come together. They always managed to rebuild their community and their society.
I mean, it's different because you still have the Jews still receive support from a lot of the major powers in the world.
Absolutely.
America always stands by Israel and the Jews. And you also have the same support from the British, from the French. So they have that support there. They have that support system. So I think it makes it different when you have that kind of backing that black Americans don't have.
True.
You also have a situation where victims of the Holocaust and their descendants have received reparations from the United States.
That's true.
They've received payments, and today are still receiving payments from something that wasn't even caused by America. The Germans perpetrated a crime against the Jewish people, and Americans are helping to pay for it. While you have in this very country a people who have been wronged for hundreds of years, and there has been no kind of rectifying for people, African people in America, but you have done the same. But you have done that for Jews who are descendants of people who were victims of the Holocaust. So I mean,
do you think race has to do with it too?
Oh, God, definitely, of course. I think that, and I think the fact that, is there a price that you can really put on the number for the amount of reparations that would need to be distributed? I mean, enslaved Africans helped build and create the wealth of this country, so much so to the point where they are ingrained in the making of the society, and they are part of the society. Yeah. So how do you compensate that type of value? And I think that's.
You mean, how do you compensate in terms of money?
Yeah, that value, that kind of value that was brought to the fabric of America because of the contributions of Africans. How do you put a value on it? How do you put a number on it? You can't
put a number on it.
It's
Absolutely
inestimable,
Right.
So that's the problem, is that it would be even so much to try to put a value on it that it would bankrupt the American.
But when people talk reparations, see, this is my understanding. Are we talking 40 acres in the mill? Are we talking dollars? What are we talking about when we talk reparations?
I think that in regards to reparations, it's going to have a holistic approach. So yes, there's going to be monetary compensation. There's going to have to be institutional corrections made. There's going to have to be societal corrections made. There's going to have to be a holistic approach to this reparations because of the many areas that we've been discriminated and are still being discriminated. You're going to have to overhaul police forces all across the nation. You're going to have to re-educate and reconstruct the educational system, the financial institutions that discriminate, the real estate institutions who gerrymander districts and who redline certain neighborhoods and zones in order to keep out people of color. There's a holistic approach that's going to have to be taken because we've been put at such a disadvantage
right from birth.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, man. So moving on. So last week we're supposed to do a podcast, but I got a sad phone call from my cousin in Nigeria.
Yeah, man.
And you and I talked about this. I was really down, and I appreciate you for coming down, definitely. Being there for me, and we talked in depth.
Definitely.
One of the things I wanted to touch on is I hate to like I always say, I hate to live in the United States and criticizing Nigeria,
right?
Or the way they do things down there,
from the comforts of your home.
Exactly, because again, I do not live there. My children are born here, but it bothers me the way things are done, because when I got a phone call and that my cousin passed, and this guy was about 31 years old, in the prime of his life.
It's nuts.
What bothered me was the way he died, and my cousin in Nigeria, which is his brother, said he died because he couldn't breathe. And I was just trying to get more explanation, and he was having chest pain. He went to the hospital, and I asked him, "Hey, what did they do for him?" They just put oxygen on him. Like they didn't bother to investigate why it's not breathing. Just giving somebody oxygen does nothing.
Right? They didn't investigate the cause of it.
Even if it's pneumonia and everything. So it brings me back to the fact that he died not because it was his time. I believe he died because of where he lives. Again, this highlight the problem we as Africans or African nations have, and how far we are behind. In 2019, behind other countries. I'm not saying, if he lives there and the same issue happened, he's gonna die or he's gonna live. But one thing I could guarantee you is he has a better chance. I could confidently assure you that, because of many stories that's come out of Nigeria, especially in the Nigerian healthcare system, I can confidently assure you that he probably died because of maltreatment, or people don't know what they're doing. It's sad that we have a country with so much potential, so much smart people, and you can die of just anything.
My cousin had a similar fate. He was misdiagnosed for about a week in the hospital, so they were giving him incorrect treatment, and they later discovered that he had hepatitis C, and he ended up dying because of not being correctly diagnosed. So he was in suffering for about a week before he died. His organs failed, and that's how he passed. And so I share the sentiments, man, because it's a sad reality of where you live shouldn't have a factor on whether you have a better chance of life,
But that is the reality. And my dad was telling me, listen to this. So he was telling me that at a hospital in Nigeria, the doctor was using the light from the cell phone to do surgery.
Wow. What?
It's crazy.
Well, the hospital lost electricity,
and he has to use his cell phone light to continue surgery.
Absolutely.
And many times he said, there'll be people in his neighborhood that will go for like simple procedure, like they have like appendix problem and they go to the hospital and they just die. That is nuts. You know, when are we as Nigeria, as Africa in general, when are we gonna say, you know what, enough is enough?
Yeah.
We need to improve. We need to compete. We need to put ourselves on the global map. You know, is that a fantasy, or is it something that's foreseeable?
I think one of the problems is that a lot of the talent runs away from Nigeria and finds solace in countries such as America, such as Europe, where they can actually be rewarded for their talents and given opportunities. So therefore, you're draining the country of its talents. You know, the brain drain of people who can actually contribute immensely to the society of Nigeria and Africa as a whole is being drained, and you can't blame those individuals because they're looking for better opportunities and they're looking for rewards of their labor. And in Nigeria, that country that is just not possible to do. And so that's the sad reality, is that because if you look at a society like America, Nigerians are one of the most highly educated groups of immigrants in the United States. Now, you if you make the correlation that the most educated group in America that's immigrant is Nigeria, but the country Nigeria itself is suffering from a lack of education, from a lack of resources, then you can see that there's something missing. How does a country that lacks resources, that lacks the proper training, that lacks the proper education, create and produce brilliant minds who are able to contribute immensely to societies outside of Africa and even become recognized as a talented group of individuals, of immigrants? It's because Nigeria doesn't reward its talent, and you can see that all across the board. Even when we were talking about sports earlier, and just how it's ironic that African players playing for African teams are not as successful as African players playing for European teams. You know, there's such a disconnect.
You know, anyway, so I think that the problem, you know what? Where do you see the country in 50 years? What do you think Nigeria is going to look like in 50 years? When you and I, we are well in our old age, and our children are pretty much contributing to the world. Where do you see that country in 50 or so years?
More of the same, man. More of the same. Unfortunately, more of the same. Now, we're hearing that Buhari administration in Nigeria is offering something called Ruga settlements. Have you heard about it?
No, I didn't. Tell me more.
So Ruga settlements, what he's proposing is that the northerners in Nigeria, they're mostly a herding group of people. They herd cows, and and they graze on land, and they raise cattle for produce of beef and meat in the beef, in the food industry in Nigeria. So what he's proposing is that each state in Nigeria will have to set aside a particular amount of land for these northern herders to come and graze on their lands in their states for free, in order to help boost the food industry in Nigeria with the contribution of the cows that contribute to the beef that's being consumed and the milk that's being consumed in the dairy industry. So his push is that these northern Fulani herdsmen are given free land in every state in order to
graze their cattle,
and to live on the land, in order to create businesses and opportunities for them to successfully graze their cattle. And a lot of people are looking at it as a land grab and an attempt to further Islamatize the country, because reports have been coming in that these Fulani herdsmen are very aggressive, that they're actually killing landowners and taking their land by force in order to graze their cattle. And now that people are screaming that this is foul from the Buhari administration, that is further aiding their attempt in taking land. So it's a big issue that's going on right now in Nigeria. It's called Ruga settlements. RUGA.
Ruga settlement. I'm gonna check that out. Well, the problem with that idea is if you give them an acre of land, they're only gonna want more and more. What would happen if they exhaust that land? They're gonna want to move to a new territory.
And so that's the argument, is that in the 70s and 80s, the same program was implemented, and those lands have been exhausted and have been abandoned, and now they're seeking to further expand their settlements again. And that was the argument, is they've done it before, they've abandoned the land, they've exhausted the resources, now they're just continue doing that.